How is it going, East North Church family? Good to connect with you via video. It's Monday. Just finished preaching Church on the Lawn services for everyone that was able to make it out. And now here I am in what now appears to be, even though this is our front stage of the church, I feel like it's our studio, but it's not. This is hopefully a place we all get to be back together with soon. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of encouraged. I see a regular set of updates about progress on a vaccine and different treatments. And it seems like, even though I would rather it come sooner rather than later, that we're going to figure this out. And when we do, rest assured, the church will gather back together. And hopefully we'll get to see you join us for that. But in the meantime, I'm doing the best that I can to provide you with sort of a recap, an opportunity to re-engage together over what we're studying. So if you're not able to make it out for whatever reason, just your physical concerns or your physical needs, whatever it is, we want to make sure that you're in the loop on what we're studying together. So if you haven't been paying attention or haven't been tuning in with us, we are in the middle of the story of the life of Joseph, which can be found in the Bible in Genesis chapter 37 through the rest of Genesis, which ends in chapter 50. And what we're doing, we're calling this series the Gospel of Joseph, because even though we're looking at a particular character in the Bible who is not Jesus, there is always, throughout Scripture, an element in which the story that you read or the circumstance that you're observing has some gospel elements to it, because the whole idea of the Bible, this is what we believe, is that God is telling a redemption story, a story to atone for the mess that is the human condition and the human experience. I'm not sure about you, but life gets messy. There's brokenness every day, every week. We encounter hardships, disappointments, things not working the way we want them to work, our bodies not working the way we want them to work. And Scripture tells us throughout its pages that the world is not the way it's supposed to be. Very early in Genesis, we lost that sort of utopian experience where we were free in every sense to engage with God without limitation and enjoy all of creation as He intended for us to enjoy it. Sin becomes the great disruptor. So what is the rest of the Bible about? It's about God providing a way through which that disruption can be brought to shalom, brought to peace, brought to resolution. And as we observe even the life of Joseph, there are going to be elements that remind us of these things throughout the story. So that's a good intro. We'll move on and do chapter 43. So if you've got your Bibles, if you want to turn and do that with me, I'm going to just kind of recap, but you could follow along and kind of like observe as I sort of verbally process what's going on in chapter 43. I'm going to pause at the end of, we're going to cover two chapters. I'm going to pause at the end and just give you a gospel moment that I'm observing that happens at the end of both. Okay? So the famine continues. Papa Jacob has already sent his sons off to Egypt to get grain because the famine is severe so that they can survive. And they've already had one interaction with their brother Joseph, who they don't recognize. He's all decked up in Egyptian garb and makeup, I'm sure, and they can't recognize him. But Joseph knows that it's his brothers, and he's tuned into the hope that he can be restored to them at some point and in some way. So they run out of that grain that they brought home, and Jacob says, well, you've got to go back to Egypt so that we can survive. And they say, well, we can't go back without our youngest brother, Benjamin. This is the requirement, the expectation that he gave us. You know, we can prove that we're not spies. This is all covered in chapter 42. Jacob's a little reluctant. Judah steps up and says, look, let it be on me. I'm going to make sure my family's on the line. If I don't bring Benjamin back, you can take my children, which it's a strange exchange, but I think we get the idea that Judah's saying, like, look, trust me, I'm going to take care of it. So Jacob finally relents and says, okay, go ahead. And he says, look, take double the money, because if you recall in the end of last chapter, their money mysteriously reappeared in their sacks. And he's saying maybe that was an oversight. Bring double the money, bring some extra gifts. Let's try to be generous. Don't you dare not come back here without Benjamin. Well, when they arrive, Joseph recognizes them and sees he's asking questions like, how's your father? And how's your family? Is it this Benjamin? He meets Benjamin, and Joseph, man, he's a pretty emotional character. As soon as he sees Benjamin, he's just like heartbroken or emotional. He has to like walk out of the room, clean up the mascara because he's crying. I don't know if it's true if Egyptians wear the heavy makeup like they show in Hollywood, but in my mind, that's definitely the case. So Joseph's all decked up in makeup. He has to go get that fixed. Anyway, so they need to buy more grain, and Joseph hooks them up, but then Joseph starts really messing with them. He starts doing a couple of different things. Well, he says, okay, put the money back in their sacks again, even though they've already tried to be like, yeah, I think you forgot the money. They were like, no, we got your money. We don't know what you're talking about. Maybe God gave it to you. So Joseph says, put the money back in their sacks again, and he says, put my silver cup that I've been drinking out of. You know what? I got to back up. I missed a pretty big detail before. He's handing out all the food because they eat with him. It's a huge part of the story. All right. In fact, I'm jumping ahead to chapter 44. Pardon me. I get ahead of myself, preaching this the second time. So, before he sends them off, which is the next chapter, what happens in chapter 43 is that they all sit down and have lunch with Joseph at his house. And Joseph knows who they are, so he arranges them by order of their age. And then the chapter ends with this idea. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's, and they drank and were merry with him. Now, it's actually that last phrase that I want to kind of like use as a capturing of the moment. They drank and they were merry with him. And what I want to say is, like, as we walk through the story, and if we try to tune into the emotional realities of not just Joseph, who's having his own emotional moments, but the brothers as well. There's a ton of stress, a ton of pressure, a ton of worry, a ton of concern. There's regret and sorrow for the way that they treated Joseph. It's already been brought up multiple times. They're having to process very difficult things that would be uncomfortable for anyone to process. But in the midst of all of this darkness and hardship, there's a bright spot. Because if we think about the significance of the idea that they sat, they ate, and they drank, and they were merry with Joseph. That's a bright spot in the story. There's a happiness conveyed there. Now, if we want to be honest, the phrase, the term, they were merry, M-E-R-R-Y, like Merry Christmas, it actually means intoxicated. So I'm not necessarily advocating for alcoholic intoxication. Don't misinterpret me and think that that's what I'm saying. And I was talking to my wife about that, and she said, well, if we're looser on the term intoxication, and what I mean by that is we're loose on the idea of what does it mean, which is fair game for the Hebrew language, pretty loose term. There is an intoxication that can come when you are with good people and enjoying good food and good drink, period. And what I mean by that, what sort of like the function of intoxication would be that the alcohol entering your bloodstream and your brain is going to limit sort of like the broad experience of the difficulties of life, and you're kind of zeroed in. This is scientific, what happens on the moment. And so whatever your present moment is, that's pretty much the moment. This is why some people can get, when they get drunk, they're very depressed because their moment is depressing. This is why it's not healthy if you're in a sad moment to drink. It just intensifies the reality of that moment. And why some people get really happy and really crazy and really stupid because that's their moment. But the merriment or the intoxication, put alcohol out of the equation for a moment, comes when we gather together with one another and enjoy a good drink. Yeah, all right? They drank and they were merry with him. It's a bright spot in the middle of a dark story, and that in and of itself reminds me of the gospel. And before you get too hesitant about this idea, let's remember that Jesus himself chose a drink, wine, to represent communion with him, and he encouraged God's people to remember him in the middle of their drink and their merriment together. So my gospel encouragement at the end of chapter 43 is for the church to recognize, and I think most of us do, to recognize the beauty and gift of fellowship one another and enjoying food and drink and being able to be merry, being able to be intoxicated with the freedom of the gospel together. And so that's what I would like to champion and highlight and encourage the church to be intentional, even during a season where you might have to socially distance, to be purposeful, to remember the benefit and the value and the joy and the gift of merriment when we eat and drink together. And as we do that, we include the gospel just as Jesus declared. Another sort of commentary on communion in the middle of this might be helpful. I know we've turned the bread and the wine into an institutional, sacramental, that's actually a term we would use, religious experience, right? Very special. But Jesus is strategically choosing at that meal with his disciples the most common elements of a meal. Even today, what do they do when you go to a restaurant, a nice restaurant, what do? They bring you bread and they bring you your water. Well, the water of the day, but you wouldn't be drinking water very often in Jesus' time. There's far too much bacteria. You would have to be right next to a spring. The fermentation experience actually is there to kill bacteria. For centuries, it has been the norm for people to drink alcohol, not for the purpose of drunkenness, but for the purpose of making sure they're not drinking bad bacteria. So Jesus is choosing the most common elements of bread and wine that would be present at any table. And he's saying, like, when you get together and do this, eat the common food. I want you to remember me. In other words, he's making a very intentional request. He's not necessarily asking us to institutionalize and create this sacramental experience in a gathering at church. He's saying, like, I want me to be included in every common moment of your life where you're getting together and remembering things and enjoying things and experiencing this merriment that happens at the end of Genesis 43. I want to be part of that moment with you. I want the good news of who I am to be present even as you quench your thirst together. So, church, let's remember that. Let's remember that even if we have a dark week, and we do, dark month, and we do, maybe some people argue that this is a dark year, and it might be. Let's remember the bright spot in the moment. It comes with the refreshing, thirst-quenching gift of the gospel, and every time we remember that, every time we have that, let's remember who Jesus is. Let's do it, and let's do it with one another. Let's pursue the beautiful gift of fellowship as best as we can. All right, that's chapter 43. Episode 2. We're binging on these episodes here today. This is chapter 44, which would be like episode, 6 or 7, and if we're watching this as a series, I don't know. So they finish that meal, and then Joseph gives them everything. They load up with grain, and then Joseph starts messing with them. He's like, okay, put the money back in their sack again. But this time I want you to put the cup that I've been drinking from. It was a silver cup, probably a Yeti brand cup. Yeti being a Hebrew term. No, I'm just kidding. It's not. I looked it up. Yeti, you know what it means? It's the abominable snowman. And it has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. Anyway, He says, put my silver cup in Benjamin's bag. And so they're halfway out the door, they're on their way, and then all of a sudden the guards come, and they're like, how dare you repay the kindness of our master by doing this awful thing and stealing from him? And they're like, whoa, like none of us would ever steal from him. If anyone is guilty of that, that person should be put to death, and the rest of us should become a slave, because there's no way we did that. Well, they're regretful for saying it, because as soon as they start searching, they find out that it's in Benjamin's bag. Oh my gosh, can you imagine the trauma of that moment? The gut-sinking feeling and realization that the very one that we're supposed to protect and bring home for the sake of our father Jacob now is the one who's super guilty of something that we can't even fathom, and nobody knows how this happens, and it feels mystically messed up, and like God's out to get them, and they're kind of like having a meltdown, and they go all the way back to Egypt, and they engage with Joseph over it. And Joseph, they're ready to say like, we'll be your servants. Just let Benjamin go home. And Joseph is like, no. Benjamin's the one I want. None of you have to do that. And then Judah steps up. Judah steps up at the end of Genesis 44. And he says this. Okay, I'm going to tell you what it is. This is verse 18. I'm just going to read. Judah went up to him and said, "O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ear, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servants the first time we visit, 'Have you had a father or a brother?' And we said, 'We have a father, an old man, and a younger brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead.'" That's Joseph. "And he alone is left of his mother's children." The mother would be Rachel. "And his father loves him. And then he said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me that I may set my eyes on him.' And we said to my Lord, 'The boy cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father, the father would die.' Then you said to your servants, 'Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall not see my face again.' So when we went back to your servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And when your father said, 'Go again, buy us a little food,' we said, 'We can't go down if our youngest brother goes with us when we go down. For we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us.' Then your servant, my father, said to me, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me.' And I said, 'Surely he has been torn to pieces.'" Again, he's retelling Joseph's story. "And I've not seen him since. If you take this one also from me, and harm happens to him, you will bring down my gray hairs in evil to Sheol." That's just a phrase that say like, I'm going to be wiped out, ruined. Judah continues, "Now, therefore, as soon as I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servants will bring down gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant," that's Judah, "became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, 'If I don't bring him back, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not here with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father.'" All right, what's happening here? That's the end of chapter 44. There's another gospel moment that we have to kind of look for, but if we're paying attention, it's pretty much there. What is Judah doing? He's exchanging. He's offering himself as an exchange for his brother Benjamin's life. Jesus, who's descended from the line of Judah, Jesus says there's no greater love than this, than for one to lay down his life for a friend. Now, I believe that Jesus is just capturing a truth that we know is true already. He's not telling me something we don't already know when he says that. We intuitively feel that in our soul, and part of the reason we do is because God has written the gospel on our hearts, and that's the way we interpret love. Real love is self-sacrificial love. And so Joseph, even though he doesn't have the gospel handy, he doesn't have any of those stories because they haven't happened yet, Joseph, with the gospel written on his heart, senses the gospel love that Judah has for his brother Benjamin, and is aware now in this moment that God has done some radical transformation from his brothers. They've gone from being the kind of brothers that would throw their brother in a pit and sell him as a slave for personal gain and lie to their father and say that he's dead. They've gone from being that kind of people to being the kind of people that would lay down their own life for their brother. Judah becomes a picture of what Jesus accomplishes before us. Here's Judah standing before Joseph, who serves like a judge, and he says, there has to be a life paid. And Judah says, then I'll give my life. I'll exchange it. You take me instead of him. And that's exactly what Jesus does before us. Because God the Father would say there has to be payment for the sins of the world. And Jesus steps in and says, no, take me. Take me. So Judah is a picture of Jesus and the gospel for us at the end of chapter 44, and tells us that real love is self-sacrificial love. It's not about what you want and how you want it and your opinion and your perspective and your values. No. The gospel says there's something greater that is required of us, and it's not the assertion of our rights and assertions of our opinions. It's the humility, which is humiliating. It's the humiliating truth of the gospel that says, rather than putting myself forward with my agenda, I'm going to defer. And I'm going to humble myself and allow other people to sort of have it their way. And I'm going to engage in love towards them that doesn't look like them doing it my way. It looks like me helping them out in a way where I'm sacrificed. That's the kind of love that Jesus calls us to. It's not just love those who love you back. It's love those who hate you. Love those who persecute you. Love your enemies. Judah is willing to show an incredible amount of self-sacrifice because of his love for his brother. Rather than being self-preserving, which was Judah at the beginning of this story. I'm tired of Joseph getting all the attention, getting all the favor. I'm ready to have him thrown in a pit and left for dead. Oh, if we can make some money off him, that's better. I don't mind lying to cover my tracks to my own father. That is so self-absorbed. Judah has had a transformation. He is now self-sacrificial. He's a picture of Jesus. He's a reminder of the gospel. And so as we read these stories, we get to be reminded of Jesus, even in the narratives, even in the different characters, even in the different elements, from the small reminder that you can drink and be merry. That's a gospel reminder. The reality of Judah laying down his life for his brother Benjamin is a gospel reminder. And so I'm thankful to be reminded that we can be refreshed by the gospel as we enjoy one another's gospel company. And we can be called to lay down our life and our preferences and our self-absorbedness, put that aside, and live with self-sacrifice, willing to lay down our own lives to love others well. Because this is how Jesus has loved us. And that's intoxicating. It's what causes us to worship. Because we're thankful for a God who would be willing to give up himself to save us, to reconcile us, to restore us, to resurrect us. All these things are true in the gospel, and they're made evident even in Genesis 43 and 44. So, church, thanks for listening. If you made it this far in the video, I'm very impressed with you, and I hope that we get to be back together as soon as possible, praying for a cure, or for all the numbers to go way back down. Anything that we can do to get back together and be normal, I'm with you. Praying for that to happen soon, and praying for you. Hey, let me hear from you if you need anything. Please don't hesitate to email todd@eastnorthchurch.com, because I'd be happy to make some connections and work out whatever it is we need to do to care for you and your family, or those that you hear of that need help. Let me hear from you, all right? Okay, I'm taking off. Thanks a lot. See you later.